Imagine, you've got an older sibling. You may, in reality, be that older sibling. But for the situation, let's say you're the youngest. But anyway, you're kids. You have been getting along lately. But your older brother or sister decides to really hit you where it hurts most on Christmas Eve. A terrifying bedtime story for one of the happiest days of the year. Jolly old Santa has been at this gift-giving thing for a while now, but only because he's a demon who lost a bet with an angel, and his punishment is being this Santa we've all come to love and know. He was sentenced to this for 1,000 years, and his sentence ends, oh, would you look at that, tomorrow, Christmas Day. Then he gets to continue his initially murderous ways. Then your sibling simply slinks out of the room, cuts off the lights, including the nightlight if you used to sleep with one, and you're left with that. Merry Christmas. I'm happy I didn't have a savage older sibling who would do something like this to me, try and scare me all the time, but it's a clever horror story for a child who still believes in Santa, isn't it? And for those like me now, dark and maybe a little twisted, it sounds like an epic story, and that is actually the general premise for our film today, 2005's Santa's Sleigh. So around 2008, I'm in Blockbuster. I can't drive yet, so I usually went with my mom to pick out movies. She wasn't super conservative with what I watched too much, and she knew I loved horror films, so she let me have that as a whole. But some I picked up were a bit bizarre, that just one mom look would lead me to just put it back down. And I remember vividly this is actually one of those films. The cover, with an angry-looking Santa wielding a sharp icicle like a knife. I don't know what it was about this film that kept popping up in my mind over the years. I think I was in my beginning phase of exploring these oddball horror films here and there. In early high school, I think it was, I eventually watched it, as I found it on YouTube randomly, and this is now maybe my 5th or 6th time watching it. So I've covered some horror comedies here, or films that are just hilariously bad. So where does Santa's Sleigh stack up for me? We've seen from Kane Hodder in particular how epic a wrestler can be in a horror film, one that's meant to be taken seriously or otherwise. Bill Goldberg is just fucking awesome and hilarious as this evil Santa Claus. I was incredibly intrigued by the premise of how Santa is evil in this world, and I'm surprised that as mean as a lot of kids are, that I haven't heard more stories of young kids being traumatized with a story like this. Maybe that's for the best though. It's not a version I would ever have thought of, but it makes for a fun outline to a dark comedy. From the initial scene, which is probably my favorite in the film, it is set up very well with the tone, and just giving a great intro into the ridiculousness that will ensue. Nicholas and Mary, or Mac. Mary stuck with me more, so I'm just going to call her that. But these are our two main characters. Ordinary teenagers dragged into this nightmare in their little home, affectionately named Hale Township in Canada. And their characters. They're reminiscent to me of your typical 90s, early 2000s teens, no more, no less. With a little romantic tension. Both have a couple humorous moments. Nick, I'm just going to call him Nick, is a bit of a smartass and screws with a couple people at different points. And I really love the mischief. One scene at a police station that I'll discuss later is just so childish, but is executed so well. This film is genuinely funny in multiple scenes, to me at least. The most effective jokes coming from our foul-mouthed Santa. He's definitely the main focus, and that's fine. Some quotable lines and some of the stunts and kills help to build the tone and the intention of this film. The acting, as you may expect, is not very good. It's not dog shit, but sometimes it's not dog shit. I'm sure they didn't critique their actors too much, to kind of help add to the satire and the goofiness a bit, so it's not too much of a complaint. The cheesier acting is fine here, but it's just sometimes they try to be a little serious at a couple moments and create tension between characters, and the delivery is just so bad that it's hard to really watch it. And of course, you can't even really relate to what they're so passionate about. It's just not goofy in a good way in that sense. You just kind of want the moment to end. Another small bit is the humor comes across as a little too awkwardly forced a few times. Sometimes it's not even failed jokes, it's just shock factor, like edgy language, or just simple swearing from like a child in general. Just bizarre placements that didn't land. I won't spoil the whole scene right now, just the setup. Two kids on Christmas morning are getting ready to open presents, and they just throw around cuss words about opening their presents in random places in their lines. And yes, kids don't know how to cuss. I get it. I just don't think the scene needed it. It felt like the writers just stepped out and let two 10-year-old kids come in for a minute and poorly attempt to be funny. Granted, a lot of the gags and jokes here are juvenile in a way. I just felt like the writer was a little bit better than this. This could be just kind of like a little nitpick of mine, though. It felt like a little bit of a cheaper attempt at comedy. But not too many moments like these. I feel, for instance, if you've seen Happy Time Murders with the Muppet influence, I felt those moments were all that film had, so I really did not enjoy that film. Speaking on the dialogue in general, it's not the wittiest thing you've ever heard a lot of the time. It's just often delivered so well, or the situation in general just makes it funny. It's just that easy slapstick humor that is just charming enough to collect enough people for a cult following. At a 5.3 out of 10 for its average rating on IMDb, it's rated much higher than many films similar to this. When it comes to athletes and films that they're in, you can expect to have references to their careers, and it can easily become just way too cheesy or obnoxious to be funny. I don't have much knowledge about Bill Goldberg or his career, but there are references, of course, most of them being ones that I missed. But it did not appear to be a constant punchline, so that's a plus if you are familiar with him. If you love dark humor and over-the-top comedy, I can't guarantee you'll love it, but I'm confident you'll walk away with some laughs in the end. A fun group watch for sure. If this isn't typically your thing, or if you simply want to hold on to the sweet, diabetic, rosy-cheeked childhood hero who says ho 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 instead of ho ho ho's in the middle of a strip club, then go ahead and move along. For my spoiler section, I'll try to lightly run through the plot and notable scenes to discuss some of my thoughts. So for those who have seen it, or for those hesitant who just want to hear the highlights without risking their time on this mockery of their childhood, join me. But again, if you are curious, it's not even an hour and a half, but either way, on to spoilers. Scrolling through just about any social media platform, if you come across any scene from this movie randomly, it's the opening scene. We've got a wealthy, snobby, scandalous family with 3-foot girthy sticks at their asses, passively aggressively partaking in a Christmas Eve meal while insulting each other. They're maybe not really exaggerated for a bickering family. I'm sure a lot of people think they're not too far off from what they deal with. But their issues don't matter anyway here because Santa makes his way down the chimney, not to deliver gifts of plastic surgery, diamonds, Louis Vuitton, but death. Again, some of the film's best kills are here. Nothing on like top 10, 20, or even 30 list, but nice comical kills to open such cozy cinema. Santa takes no prisoners, including the family dog, which, don't worry, it's not a graphic or realistic looking kill. Basically a yappy stuffed animal being booted like a soccer ball. One of my favorite moments being Jason, the younger guy here, who is destined to eventually live with mommy and daddy in their basement until he's at least 50 years old, shows off his karate skills to Santa by erratically swinging his arms around for several seconds. Santa even lets him finish his setup before swiftly kicking him into a cabinet of fine china that no one ever truly cares about anyway. The other being one of the women pleading with Santa and telling him that she's been good all year, which meant fuck all to him. The following scene, though, is just as memorable to me. One of the main ones I think about when I imagine this film over the years. And it's memorable to me all because of Mrs. Talbot. A petite elderly woman as charming and comforting as a bed lined with tacks, or a polar bear juggling your intestines. Nick and Mary work at this sandwich shop, and Mrs. Talbot has graced them with her presence on Christmas Eve, and she hates everything and everyone. Reprimands the owner for saying Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas. He corrects himself, and she thanks him and tells him to go fuck himself. An underrated goodbye, to be honest. I would have loved to see more of an exchange between Mrs. Talbot and Santa before he kills her, but what we get is still cool. There's a hilarious shot of her swerving on the way home, driving, head lower than the top of the steering wheel due to her height, and then Santa runs her off the road for going too slow, and also because she yelled at him to suck it when he complained. Mary and Nick get to go home a little early after getting shitty gift shop gifts, although Nick's clock that tells him all the different time zones and what time it is in these different regions comes in handy later. And either way, it's still miles better than Mary's snow globe she gets. Nick confides in Mary he doesn't like Christmas because he never got what he wanted when he was younger. And he lives with his grandpa, the town kook, basically with his crazy stories and inventions. Equipped also with an underground bunker, panic room, what have you. Grandpa also hates Christmas, and shares the story I mentioned earlier of an angel beating Santa at a game, causing him to be the Santa we know and love for 1,000 years, until his punishment is lifted and he can unleash holy hell again. Nick puts 2 and 2 together and discovers that today is 1,000 years from that night. During this time, Mary comes over for some tension-filled, awkward teenager time. And during this, Pastor Timmons is having a service at church expressing the importance of donating for charity. He oddly reprimands the members for putting some coins on the offering tray. Bills only for charity. The charity being, you guessed it, the town strip club called Gold Diggers. You know, I don't like strip clubs or plan to ever go to one, but I do love looking at the names when I see one. Just hilariously tacky. But Santa rolls up here with his fat, swole-ass reindeer, or hell deer, as he goes on to call it later, barging in for some more killing. Pastor Timmons manages to escape, but no one else does. And even at one point, despite Santa's violent and vulgar nature, he actually stops to spray and wipe down a stripper pole before removing it from its place, and then tossing it to the hands of a bouncer, and then swiftly kicks it up from the bottom into a light fixture, electrocuting the bouncer. I just thought this was one of the more interesting kills the film had. But then he sets the place ablaze by blowing on a piece of coal and tossing it onto the floor. Back to Grandpa's house with more tension-filled, awkward teenager time, with one of those odd arguments I mentioned earlier. The acting is so poor and deadpan that I didn't really know what was so important or irritating about their conversation they were having. But anyway, thankfully the scene doesn't last too long and Mary leaves. But Christmas Day comes, and those kids I mentioned earlier who don't know how to cuss, with their indifferent parents, are basically have their heads blown up by gifts left by Santa Claus. The gifts that were bombs. What was especially funny though about this scene, in all its darkness, was the grandma just saying, fuck. I just like how they write some of the elderly in this film. Pastor Timmons gives his stuttered condolences at church to the sinners at the abomination that is the strip club, and he even goes on to say their names, their stripper names for some reason, all the while profusely sweating, putting an amusing and ironic twist on saying that somebody's sweating like a whore in church. The sandwich shop owner is killed by being stabbed through the neck with a Hanukkah menorah candle that he had. There's actually a lot of Jew jokes in this film. Inside ones, too, with the cast or otherwise. Goldberg himself being Jewish, I believe. as well as the actors in the opening scene. It's just crazy with religion that the Jewish population gets like the brunt of the religious jokes. That's been a common thing over the years. And it seems odd to me, especially with all that they went through. But anyway, Nick discovers him, somehow still alive, just long enough to tell him that Santa is real. So Nick is down at the police station later for questioning. I mentioned Nick being a little prankster earlier. The main scene that I'm referring to being him fucking with a distracted front desk officer. So Nick is in line to be interviewed by Captain Caulk, spelled C-A-U-L-K. And Nick glances at some pictures of other police captains, sergeants, whatever, and comes across a Captain Bush. I'm sure you see where this is going. He basically gets the front desk officer to describe the captains and compare them, ultimately getting the officer to say things like, he likes Caulk, Bush is okay, but he prefers Caulk. And how you view humor like that is going to determine how you view the next 10 to 15 minutes, as these types of jokes continue off and on. But first, Captain Caulk talks to Nick and basically brushes him off and his accusations of Santa being behind the murders. Moments later, after Nick leaves, Santa barges in and kills Captain Caulk. And as he exits, it shows the aftermath of his killing of the other officers in the building. And I feel like this is kind of a missed opportunity for some more nice, humorous action and one-liners. But we do still get a good bit by the end of the film. Here, maybe it was either a budgetary thing, or maybe they just didn't want to overdo it. So that's only a mild complaint. Mary had picked Nick up with some more subtle Caulk jokes in the mix. But then they discover that Santa has stolen a cop car and is following them, leading to a car chase. Santa failed to pull them over, but actually charges after them on foot. And as silly as that is, how well he can keep up with them on foot, it was honestly kind of terrifying in a way, seeing him run and keep pace with them, especially as big as he is. There's a gun in the truck that Nick finally learns how to use, and he shoots Santa off the truck, with basically no real damage done to him. They make it to Grandpa's, where they go to the bunker only to go out the secret exit, as Santa quickly finds them. Grandpa gets them to the secret garage of snowmobiles to help them get away. Grandpa talks to Santa as he discovers them, and talks to him almost like an old nemesis. Hint, hint. Grandpa is distracted and is run over by the Helldeer and sleigh, putting a twist on, to me, the most bizarre and concerning Christmas songs. Another chase ensues, leading back into town during a holiday event where Pastor Timmons is bumped up into the passenger seat of the sleigh and knocked out. Our heroes make it to a school and hide and wait out their time until midnight at the North Pole, or 7 p.m. their time zone, by checking Nick's handy-dandy 25 time zone clock. It's basically Santa loses his powers then. They're found again and chased. They stumble onto a skating/hockey rink where they choose the perfect time for some more tension-filled, awkward teenager time. That is, of course, interrupted moments later by Santa driving a Zamboni at them. But they're saved by Grandpa, who, in a not-so-surprising turn of events, is the angel who challenged Santa and beat him 1,000 years ago. He had given up his immortality to be with Nick's late grandmother. They go for a rematch, where Santa makes a hole into hell the target instead of the fishing hole from the past. They're trying to get that curling stone as close to it as possible without it going in. Santa, of course, at this point cheats, not taking any chances, and throws Nick's grandfather into the hole. Midnight strikes at the pole, but Santa claims time is irrelevant because all the zones converge at the North Pole, making Christmas end when he says it ends. He takes off anyway, and Grandpa, who is holding onto a piece of the ice, calls his bluff and says he is actually powerless. I don't know, after the scene where Grandpa dies originally, I still like this film. It has its moments, but to me it falls off a little bit. I don't know how to explain it. Just the whole final showdown and the last scene that comes soon just feels a little anticlimactic and even kind of rushed compared to the rest of the film, but I still found some entertainment in it. And the film actually doesn't go on much longer anyway. But continuing on, Mary and Nick find some hunters in town and convince them to shoot at the sleigh as it's coming back towards them. They all shoot with rifles as it hurtles to the earth. It crash lands, revealing now a dead Helldeer and a dead Pastor Timmons in his earlier Santa costume that he had on, impaled on a flagpole. This exchange is the dumbest thing to me that could have been made a lot simpler. The townspeople now think Pastor Timmons was the killer the entire time because he was the only Santa in the sleigh, I guess. But they had a whole event. Everyone in town saw a different Santa riding the sleigh into town, with Pastor Timmons still there with them up to that point. And Pastor Timmons was even leading the event. Does everyone just have a shit memory now? Also, Nick doesn't correct them, stating that they shouldn't live in fear. Yes, they should. An immortal killer Santa is on the loose, maybe powerless now, but not dead. And there's always next Christmas for him to sneak up on them again and make things just as bad, if not worse. I just think they shouldn't have gone with the Pastor Timmons scapegoat. Just probably brought the Helldeer down with an empty sleigh. But I guess you really shouldn't question movies like this anyway. But just outside of this, there's just a noticeable difference in just how invested I was in the story and the humor. The final scene, though, is Santa at an airport ready to go back to the North Pole. More clean cut and no Christmas suit on. His name on the ticket being Satan, obviously pronounced Satan. And that's Santa's sleigh. There's even some bloopers in the credits, which aren't the most entertaining bloopers, but I love when end credits have them. Another creative touch was the cast list having two columns, one being nice, one being naughty. And certain characters and cast members have a check or an X in their certain columns. Two of the funniest X's for me for the naughty list was Santa himself, as well as Pastor Timmons. This film is so stupid, but so much fun to me. David Steinman was the writer and director. Not only his debut, but his only major writing and directing credit, as he's usually a production assistant. I wonder what it would have been like if he had gotten more work, even just for films of a similar vibe and budget. But I'm happy this film exists. The humor in this black comedy is pretty juvenile, but lands incredibly well to me. The characters outside of Santa are nothing special, but I like the bickering between Mary and Nick as a whole. It was cool watching Mary struggle to teach Nick how to do things that old-fashioned minds might call manly skills. Plus, Pastor Timmons was a fun, although fucked up, piece of shit addition. But overall, solid, low-budget action. I'll personally give Santa's Sleigh a 6.8 out of 10. A bit high for most, and probably a bit higher than this film probably deserves. But a solid guilty pleasure for me. It's R-rated, inappropriate humor, so evaluate how you often feel about that before watching it and or recommending it. I hope this review is enjoyable. I haven't done a somewhat detailed synopsis since my Jeepers Creepers Reborn review. You've listened to that, so please let me know how this style sits with you as like an occasional episode that I might do here and there. And thanks so much for listening, and until next time on The Entertainment Room.